Chapter 3. Quest for the Mirror. The following day started in its usual dull and frustrating manner. Hoggy missed the maths class, because Higgledy and Piggledy had taken a splash in a puddle, and she had to clean the pugs before returning them to their owner. When she finally arrived at school, almost an hour late, she discovered to her horror that their science project was due that very day.
"I completely forgot,"
Hoggy said to Scooter, as the rest of the class were turning in their drawings and reports.
"I could add your name to my project,"
Scooter whispered, after making sure that Mrs. Chakrabarty, their science teacher, wasn't listening.
"We can say that we both did it." "No,"
Hoggy shook her head resolutely.
"that wouldn't be fair. Besides, Miss Chakrabarty wouldn't believe it anyway." "Well, we could—" "It's all right, Scooter," Hoggy interrupted him. "Really, she'll probably let me make it up somehow."
After Miss Chakrabarty's class, as the two friends sat on the window-sill of the school's top floor, and Hoggy finally ate her breakfast, a Marmite sandwich that had become all crummy for being tossed around her backpack all morning, she remarked,
"The day has only started, and I'm already in trouble. What else is going to happen today?"
Scooter sighed. "Mr. Preston gave us our homework back." He pulled a few sheets of paper out of his backpack and handed them to Hoggy. "I picked up yours." Hoggy opened her maths homework from the last week and gasped,
"An F!"
She stuck her homework in her bag with frustration.
"You know what the worst thing is? I actually tried this time." "Oh, Scooter,"
she said, after a few moments of silent brooding,
"I think they may hold me back a year this time."
"Don't even say that." Scooter sounded genuinely horrified. "Things will work out. It's just one F."
"Actually, it is my third F in Mr. Preston's class,"
Hoggy confessed.
"I just don't understand maths. It's so hard, and it seems pointless, too. What do we need fractions for? All these problems about cutting a pie into enough pieces to feed 14 people. Has Mr. Preston ever tried cutting a pie into 14 pieces? It would just be a big mess. Now, if I had to feed 14 people, I'd buy at least 4 pies."
The friends fell silent as Pickle and Brick entered the hall, and began to terrorize a group of third-years into giving them their pocket-money.
"His father is a judge, you know,"
Scooter whispered after a few minutes.
"Last month he sent a homeless old man to jail for stealing a cup of coffee. It was such a petty crime. Nobody wanted to deal with it, not even the coffee-shop owner. But Pickle's dad said that it did not matter if it was just a cup of coffee. He said that people had to take responsibility for their actions."
Hoggy frowned. She wondered what Judge Anderson would say about responsibility if he learned that his son was dunking other students' heads into toilets and stealing their money. The day continued to get worse when Mrs. Hamilton assigned them a new project in her history class. "I want you to write a 10-page report on some important figure from British history," she said. "It can be a public figure, a scientist or a writer, anyone who has made a valuable contribution to our culture. If you're not sure who to write about, ask me." The fifth-years broke out in a loud chorus. Some sounded disgruntled, others excited. A few hands went up. Hoggy, too, raised her hand. "What is it, class?" Mrs. Hamilton asked in an icy tone.
"Mrs. Hamilton,"
Hoggy asked,
"can I write a report about Captain Morgan, the pirate?"
Mrs. Hamilton's face acquired an expression one gets when encountering an unpleasant smell. "And what valuable contribution did Captain Morgan make to our culture?" Hoggy was stumped for a moment or two.
"They made a movie about him."
Mrs. Hamilton let out a long, deep sigh. "Honestly, class, for someone who spends so much time at the library, you are astonishingly ignorant." The class burst with laughter. Hoggy was fuming all through the recess.
"Another report!"
she exclaimed, between spoonfuls of canned soup.
"As if we didn't have plenty to do already. 10 pages, and I can't even write about who I want."
But as the day was nearing its end, Hoggie's mood began to improve. After all, Mrs. Hamilton's report wasn't due for another 3 months. Meanwhile, Hoggie and Scooter were about to undertake an exciting new adventure: the search for Dr. Barnaby's mysterious book. As soon as the bell rang the end of classes, the two friends hurried to the library. Once there, Scooter obtained 2 copies of the building's floor plan, and the friends started their hunt by taking a tour of the library.
"Dr. Barnaby says that the mirror is not in the catalogue," Scooter pointed out. "That means we're looking for an old brown book without a reference number. Shouldn't be too difficult."
And so it seemed. But after a couple of hours of searching, the young adventurers began to suspect that their job might turn out to be harder than they had thought. For one thing, they never realized until that day how huge the library's collection was. Thousands and thousands of volumes were stored in its many rooms. Secondly, many of the books in the library had been there for a very long time. When the books' covers wore off, they were sent to the library's bindery. There the books were given a standard brown hardback, so that when they returned from the bindery, they all looked exactly the same.
"The guy who stashed the mirror in the library sure knew how to hide things,"
Hoggie noted, grudgingly. When evening began to creep into the building, the friends were still on its first floor.
"I'm tired,"
Scooter said at last.
"Let's take a break."
They sat on one of the stone benches just outside the library, and shared the pies which Angela, Scooter's and his dad's housekeeper, had made for Scooter that morning. The sun was rolling down slowly behind the library, making the statue of Saint Jerome cast a long shadow across the adjacent street. Munching on her pie, Hoggie studied the library. Occupying an entire city block, the building was absolutely gigantic. The rooms of its first floor alone were so spacious, their windows so wide and tall, that a car could easily drive through one of them. The library's walls were made of grey stone, and all over the walls hundreds of names of famous writers, scientists, and philosophers were carved. Sometimes Hoggie and Scooter quizzed each other to see which one of them knew more people behind the engraved names.
"Who is Herodotus?"
Hoggie asked presently, pointing at the name carved just above the entrance to the library.
"A historian,"
Scooter replied, without the slightest pause. Scooter was very good with facts and names, and he usually won the quizzes.
"He lived in ancient Greece."
Hoggie continued to scan the front of the building. Victor Hugo, Copernicus, Aristotle, Homer. Hoggie certainly knew who these people were. Suddenly she stumbled on an unfamiliar name.
"Alexander Libri."
"I don't know him," Scooter admitted.
"Neither do I. But I think I've heard this name before."
After the break, the young adventurers continued their search for 2 more hours. Finally, Hoggie said,
"Well, that's enough for one day. Let's get out of here and spend some of our earnings."
"Where do you want to go?"
"First, I want to buy Aunt Michelle's locket back, and then we can go to Icarus's."
Scooter wrote down the name of the book at which they left off, and the friends hurried outside. It was a Friday night, and most of the library patrons had already left. As the children were walking through the deserted foyer of the first floor, Hoggie said,
"Have you ever wondered what the library looks like at night?"
Scooter shrugged.
"I imagine very empty and very quiet." "I bet a place this old has tons of ghosts."
Scooter chuckled.
"Ghosts? Seriously, Hoggie? There are no ghosts." "Why not?"
"It is unscientific. In hundreds of years there hasn't been a single case of ghosts or haunted houses that hasn't turned out to be a hoax."
"Well, this one is real,"
Hoggie said stubbornly.
"The Librarian."
"The Librarian?" Hoggie nodded.
"The restless spirit of the library's first librarian. They say he was here one evening, all by himself, looking for some book, when this huge bookcase fell down and killed him. Now his spirit walks about the library every night, still looking for that book. Pretty spooky, eh?"
Scooter snorted. "Balderdash!"
"No, it's not,"
Hoggy protested.
"People have actually seen it."
"What people?"
"Colin, the security guard. He's seen the librarian with his own eyes."
"Where?"
"On the second floor. Colin was making his rounds one night when he saw it. It was just sort of floating between the aisles, and it had a scroll in its hands. One moment it was there, and the next moment it was gone. Colin was so scared, he's never worked a night shift again."
In the meantime, the friends crossed the street and found themselves in front of Jonathan Brickenhoff's pawn-shop. Inside the pawn-shop, the children came face to face with Danny Dudd. Danny was Jonathan Brickenhoff's mate. Unlike Brickenhoff, who was short and slouchy, and had a face that resembled the muzzle of a rat, Danny was a tall, broad-shouldered man, with ruby cheeks and thick long hair. He could even be considered handsome, were he not so hopelessly stupid. Alerted by the chiming of the front door, Danny turned around, and the children froze. The man had a loaded crossbow, and he was pointing it right at them.
"Awesome thing," Danny said. "You can kill a bear with it."
The crossbow must have been the latest of Brickenhoff's acquisitions, added to the pawn-shop's already enormous collection of electric guitars, saxophones, and other odd items.
"Where did you get this beauty?"
Danny asked. Jonathan Brickenhoff was at the opposite end of the shop, a phone in one hand and a small notebook in another. He was leafing through the notebook in search of a telephone number. Brick was sitting on a tall stool in the corner of the shop, attaching price tags to a bunch of trinkets. He noticed his classmates, but didn't say anything.
"Some loser pawned it last year," Brickenhoff replied absent-mindedly. "I held on to it for a while, thought the junior might learn how to use it, but it was just a waste of money." "Don't tell me little Charlie isn't a good shooter." "He isn't," Brickenhoff replied curtly. Brick shifted uncomfortably on his stool. "Well," Danny carried on, "maybe you should take him for some proper hunting." "I did," Brickenhoff said even more curtly. Brick lowered his eyes and pulled his head into his shoulders. "Me and the boys took him duck hunting last year." "How did it go?" Upon this question, Brick pulled his head even deeper into his shoulders. "It was the most embarrassing day of my life," Brickenhoff spat. "There was I, thinking I'd be making a man out of my son, and there was my son crying over a dead duck."
"They killed Hughie,"
Brickenhoff imitated Brick in a tearful voice. "And then the silly sop ran away, and we spent the rest of the weekend looking for him in the reeds." Danny tilted his long-haired head backward, and let out a thunderous laugh. Brick blushed, and turned away from Hoggie's and Scooter's astonished eyes. By then Brickenhoff had finally found the telephone number, dialed it, and pressed the phone to his ear. "Brickenhoff here," he said. Danny put the crossbow on the glass counter, and began to play with a model of the Galaxy that was standing on one of the shelves. Brick finished attaching the price tags, and began to put the trinkets into the glass box of the counter. He still did not dare to meet his schoolmate's gaze. "I appreciate your impatience, sir," Hoggy heard the pawn-shop owner say just then, "but we are already working as fast as we can, and frankly, in a matter like this, it may be dangerous to rush things." Brickenhoff cast a suspicious look towards the children. "We don't want to attract too much attention, do we?" Hoggy could not hear the rest of the conversation, as Brickenhoff retired to the back of the shop. For a few moments the friends waited in silence, interrupted only by the squeaking of the Galaxy model, as Danny tried to rotate the sun around the earth. Eventually
Brickenhoff reappeared from the back of the shop. His face bore a sour expression.
"What does he say?"
Danny asked.
"Says things aren't happening fast enough for his liking." "Well, if he thinks he can do better, he should do it himself," Danny commented. "That's what I told him," Brickenhoff said spitefully. "Well," he admitted a moment later, "I didn't, but I should have." "What else did he say?" "He wants to come over tomorrow night."
There were acidic notes in the pawnshop owner's voice.
"Doesn't trust us."
"Ha!" Danny responded.
"We don't trust him either." "No, we don't,"
Brickenhoff echoed broodingly. Suddenly he remembered that Hoggie and Scooter were still in the shop.
"What do you want?"
he barked.
"I want my aunt's locket back."
Hoggie pointed at the item. Brickenhoff reached into the glass box, fished the locket out of the sea of wrist-watches, and slapped it on the counter.
"That'll be £80.
Hoggie felt anger rising inside her. When Aunt Michelle pawned the locket, she received mere £40 for it. She knew that the thing was worth a lot more, but had no choice but to take Brickenhoff's unfair offer. Their rent had just gone up, and now, once again, the greedy pawnshop owner was taking advantage of them. Barely restraining herself from saying something nasty, Hoggie counted the money and handed it to Brickenhoff.
"All yours,"
the man said, sliding the locket across the counter. Just then, Danny accidentally knocked Saturn off its orbit. Saturn fell down on the crossbow's string, and the string snapped, sending the arrow across the room into the opposite wall. Hoggie and Scooter shrieked, and fell on the floor, while Brickenhoff and Brick ducked under the counter.
"Danny!"
the pawnshop owner yelled at his mate.
"Have you lost your mind?"
"Sorry." His face stretched in a stupid smile. Danny picked up the crossbow and examined it.
"Don't know how it happened."
Brickenhoff pulled the crossbow out of Danny's hands, and put it back on the shelf.
"Stop fooling around, and get back to work. You little monkeys, run along too," he said to Hoggie and Scooter.
The children did not have to be asked twice. They grabbed Aunt Michelle's locket, and darted out of the pawnshop.